Thank you everyone for joining us today. This is a really exciting one for us at ASAP Bio because if you saw our January call, you will know that we've refocused our future directions, and this aligns perfectly with that focus, which is definitely planned. And at ASAP Bio, we're really now focusing on how to lower the barriers that exist for preprint adoption in terms of recognition and rewards. And so today, we're meeting with two other people who have done this and are working on these kind of things, not necessarily for preprints, in the hope that we might learn something from them, and also maybe you will all learn something that you can take away as well. So we're going to start with Michael, who's going to talk about his work with HELIOS and introduce what HELIOS is. And then we'll hear from Shubha, who has actually helped to transform a departmental specific policy. And this is where I'm hoping you will all be able to figure out things that you could also take in your departments. And before we get into those, I actually had a meeting with the university I'm nearby now recently, and we were talking about preprint policies. They don't have one. They really liked the idea of one. So if your university doesn't have a specific policy, you should get one. They're good. And then tell us about it so we can celebrate you and tell everyone how amazing you are. Okay, with that, I will hand straight over to Michael.
Okay, well, I hope I don't disappoint. I have one slide on Helios, but I'll talk a little bit about it. And a lot of my work is both motivated by and I think has been synergistic with the efforts that have been taking place in Helios. So a lot of the work that I've been doing really falls under this heading of how can we align incentives with institutional values? So if we think about the way institutionals function and some of the things that we talk about, like in university mission statements, they're very value centered. And the question is when it comes to rewarding individual scientists, how can we reward those people in a way that aligns with what our institutions say that they value, right? So what are the important things to the institution? And I would argue that, by and large, this alignment between what we say we value and what we reward has been kind of skewed. And that might be an understatement, so to speak. So just to jump in here to the next slide. So what is Helios? And I'm actually going to talk a little bit about some specific things that I've worked on in my own institution and some stuff we're doing more broadly. But what is Helios? So Helios is the Higher Education Leadership Initiative in Open Science. It is a very specific US-based initiative that sprung out of the National Academies for Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. The initial launch was called the Roundtable on Aligning Incentives for Open Science. So Helios is a high-level engagement from colleges and universities that really centers on three components. One is a presidential commitment. So signing up for Helios, it's something that any institution in the US can sign up for free. There's no membership fee. It's really, if you want to be involved with it, you can be involved with it. It requires some campus engagement. So each of the campuses that are involved have one, two, or a handful of people who are involved with the effort. We meet, we have community meetings once a month typically, and then there are some other things that have evolved through that. And the whole goal here is to develop a community of practice. And the idea here is we want to sort of move forward with how we can better improve the way we share scholarship, the way we value scholarship, and all in the service of making our work more relevant for, but also more accessible to the world writ large. And this means that, we're going to be doing work that is reproducible, where all the bits and pieces of the research pipeline are shared publicly, so that other people can leverage that work. So there's better sharing of information, better sharing of data, better sharing of research reports, better sharing of research tools, and so forth. So this is a pretty big initiative. Right now, I think there's 106 colleges and universities who have signed on to this. And there's been some high-level discussions that have emerged over the last several years about how we, as a community, and again, this is really focused on the US because it comes out of the national academies here, is how can we sort of advance this mission to better make our work openly available for the public good. Um, if you want to learn more about Helios, you can go to the Helios website, www.heliosopen.org. Now, one of the main thrusts that has emerged in the last year and a half has really been centered on incentive systems. So we all recognize that to get faculty to do something, you really have to make what it is that you want them to do part of the reward system. And so one of the big initiatives with Helios has been trying to transform the way we do rewards and recognitions, promotion and tenure, and other sorts of ways of recognizing scholarship that rewards people for doing open, transparent scholarship. So I'm going to move on to my next slide. I think there it is. Okay, so yeah, again, here's my talk. Just to remind you, this is about aligning incentives with institutional values. Now I'm going to transition into some stuff that I've done specifically within my university, but which we're also trying to sort of move beyond the University of Maryland, actually beyond my department, to make it more impactful. There's a lot of resources that we put together. You can go to these resource pages here. And I think Katie has these slides and she can share. So I thought maybe a good place to start here was just to plot out the historical and forecasted publication trends for the psychological sciences and the biological sciences. I'm a psychologist by training. I work in a psychology department. I'm a psychology chair. And I'm represented by this bottom line here of the circles. This is the annual publication rate within the psychological sciences. The red is the actual data taken from the National Science Foundation here in the US per annum publications. And the blue is the interpolated values, assuming a historical inflation rate on publications. So it turns out that since the 1600s, the annual rate of increase in publications per annum has been a little bit over 5%. So actually a little steeper in psychology, a little bit less in the biological sciences. So if we look at this snapshot, it looks like we've been really, ramping up our productivity. We're doing great science. We're really giving back to the community. We're making great scientific advances. But as those of you who are familiar with what's been going on in psychology can attest to, and maybe in biology too, is that there's still a problem. So this is a headline that came out the day after Robert F. Kennedy was confirmed through the U.S. Senate, written by Adam Marcus and Ivan Oransky of Retraction Watch fame. And the title here it says it all, right? The scientific literature can't save you now. So despite having all the science that's flooding the ecosystem, it's not doing us any good. And the reason is because basically you can cite any peer-reviewed research article to support whatever claim you want to support. And this is exactly what happened in the Senate hearings here in the US. I don't want to get political about this, but just observing what has taken place. More concretely, if you look back at these per annum publication trends, a rough estimate of the number of these things that are replicable is about 50%. So while we might be publishing in the psychological sciences a little under 100,000 articles right now, half of those likely won't actually end up replicating when someone tries to replicate them. Same thing for the biological sciences. You don't have to go far to look at this stuff, but the critical piece here is that unreplicable science it's not just a yearly thing. It accumulates in the ecosystem, much like carbon dioxide accumulates in the atmosphere, right? It just keeps building and building and building until you do something to dampen down the emissions or start capturing the carbon molecules. And so what this plots is where this trend line is going. And the striking thing here is that by 2060, which is only 40 years out, we're going to have 5 million unreplicable science articles in psychological sciences alone. This line just plots this trend line for psychological sciences. In psychological science alone, only counting data from 2003 onward, there will be 5 million unreplicable studies using that estimate of a 50% replication rate. The headlines that go along with this, I mean, I don't need to probably plot this for most of you, but uh, it's not just psychology. It's all over the place. We see documented examples of fraud. That's one case, but also a lot of attempts to replicate our work that surprisingly fall flat. And so the question here is what can we do about this? And to me, this is a signal that there's something wrong with our scientific ecosystem. And one of those pieces where I think that there are some problems is in the incentive systems. So this is, you all are probably familiar with Goodhart's law. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. And partly that's because people start to game it. And so the key question here is how can we rework this incentive system so that the things people are trying to game are the things we want them to do, right? So how can we set up the system in a way that gets the gaming to foster pro-social behavior, to foster greater sharing of their work, foster greater transparency and greater or higher quality science. So we undertook this effort at Maryland. We're now trying to propagate this out through the rest of psychology. I actually have a working group that we're trying to put together. We're meeting next Wednesday. So far, about 20 people are signed up for it. These are departments of psychology and a few other departments across the country. And the goal here is to sort of figure out a way that we can work collectively to move forward with a set of reform efforts that really incentivize people for doing high quality, trustworthy, transparent, and reproducible science. That's the key component here. Right now, I think arguably it's a coin flip if you want to pull something out of the literature, whether it's going to be a replicable finding or not. And that's not a good place to be if we want to have a trustworthy science. So the reform efforts around here at Maryland have been focused on trying to build this trust, also to correct the misalignment between what our university says it values and what it actually rewards, and then to address some of the issues with the problematic metrics that people use. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but essentially what we did is we reworked all of our incentive systems from the hiring point all the way down through promotion and tenure, annual review, internal funding mechanisms, and annual rewards that we give out to really promote people to really work towards a set of common pro-social goals that focus on the behaviors of the scientists, not on their outcomes per se. So we wanted to eliminate some of those biased indicators and really focus on rewarding people for engaging in scientific practices, the behavior side of it, that are consistent with high quality science that advance the values of the university. Just to give you a sense of the types of things that we wanted to do and what some of the criteria might look like in this sort of reformed system. We want to improve rigor through transparency, leading to higher quality, more reproducible science. We want to sort of reward people for giving back to the community. So any type of work that is going to be use inspired or have some societal benefit, we want to make sure people are being rewarded for that. And then all of the aspects of accessibility. How can we make our work more accessible to the communities we serve? How can we make science more open and accepting of a broader swath of the population so they can participate in the scientific effort? The second piece of this is, once you have the criteria, you have to have some way of getting the faculty to document it. So we also reform the way we document science. And so this has also been something that Helios has been working on, is trying to think about alternative ways that we can get people to document aspects of their scholarship that reflect what we care about. Right now, if you're just looking at a CV, all you can do is count the number of publications where people have published in, unless you're going to read everything that they've done. And so what we've done here at Maryland is we've rolled out what we call an annotated CV, which really highlights things that we want people to sort of report on, like, what's the scope of the research? If we can have some sort of proxies for statistical power, something like, reporting on the sample size of the studies, efforts that they've undertaken to ensure that their work is reproducible and transparent. So like, have you posted your code, having people document where they've posted their code, where the data can be accessed and so forth, and a variety of other things. Really sort of opening up so that people can better contextualize their work and highlight the things that make their work high quality. I won't go, this is just an example of one of mine. I won't go into that. Here are some sample criteria that sort of are documented, I guess, with or aligned with some of the criteria or some of the values we might want to promote. So something like openness and transparency. Well, this really gets to the core point of openly sharing and making our work more accessible. Things like rigor and integrity. How can we um, um, document but also reward people for doing ethically sound, transparent, and reproducible work? Things that might reflect the community aspect of our value system is how can we give that basic science back to the society? So what are we doing to foster community engagement or sharing with the community? And then things like commitment to providing equitable access to scholarship through open access. So that's the open access component of it that Johnny mentioned. Just some things that I've learned throughout this whole process. Really, it's been about a 7-year ordeal. Is that, faculty really, they want to do the right thing, but they also want to be rewarded for it. And what's really interesting here is that, when we started getting into this, I found that people were already making pro-social behaviors, like, wanting to publish in open access journals, but also mentally struggling with, should I go that direction? Or should I be really trying to maximize my impact factor? I also discovered that some faculty were just actually really excited to be able to do things that didn't align with the sort of traditional way of evaluating science. It's been another lesson is that it's really hard to get people to imagine a different system of evaluation. So it does take time to socialize and educate people on what's possible, and that there's nothing magical about the research, teaching, and service three-legged stool. That just happens to be the thing that was put in place at the beginning. So we could imagine something very different if we put our minds to it. And then finally, I think this is the key component here for people who want to do this on their own is administrators, when you bring this to them, they're totally open to it. And this is one of the barriers that I think a lot of faculty have is that they don't think administrators are going to be supportive. In my experience, talking with people at multiple universities and through Helios, this is absolutely not the case, that most administrators really are keen to do something different and they're open to it, but they just want the faculty to bring those ideas to them and to implement them. They don't want to be the ones who are going to sort of force faculty down a new path. They want the faculty to come up with these new ways of doing things and to shepherd them forward. So that's all I have. If anybody wants to learn more about this work, I am happy to spend time talking to you individually as a group or whatever you want. Just let me know.
Thank you. Change is really, really difficult for anyone who's even thinking about trying to do it, but it is really rewarding. And I like that you got that. You spoke to that balance between sort of the internal fight a lot of people have, because I've come across this as well between sort of what I need to do for my career, or when it comes to preprints, it's usually framed as what my trainees need versus what is sort of the right thing to do. If you do have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat as we go, but we will do a Q&A soon. Shubha, are you ready?
Yep. Hello?
Oh, I think I need to stop sharing. Sorry, I thought I did that already.
Yeah, there's no way I could do your slides.
You
Yeah,
should
so
do
should
that.
I just start?
Yes, whenever you're ready.
Okay. So I'm Shubha Tole. I live in Mumbai, India. I work at one of India's premier research institutes, the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. I got my bachelor's degree here in Bombay, St. Xavier's College. Went to Caltech for my PhD, University of Chicago for my postdoc. Returned to India with a passion and idealism about contributing to the society that raised me and so on in 99. And I like to say that, I've been doing a good bit of that. For the past 5 years, I've taken the role of the Dean of Graduate Studies of my institute. We have only PhD programs. We have a small master's program, but we do not have undergraduates. It is an institute focused on research in the basic sciences, so physics, chemistry, biology, also technology and computer sciences, science education, and mathematics. So we have these 6 subjects represented, and we have the main campus in Mumbai, and 6 centers that are in Hyderabad, in Bangalore, in Pune, and in Mumbai. So basically, all of these bear our name. We have faculty in each of these centers. The centers tend to be focused on one or the other subject, such as the National Center for Biological Sciences in Bangalore, NCBS, and so on. We have interdisciplinary centers, theoretical centers. The total student population in all of these is about 1,100 spread across all. And I'm Dean of Graduate Studies of the entire TIFR graduate school. So the management of academics is my portfolio. We have across all of these centers about 250 scientists. So that gives you a sense of the system. Our institute is, I think, coming up on 75 years. So it was really started close to the time of India's independence, and it's the premier institute of India. We award our own degrees, have been doing so for the last more than 20 years when we became a deemed university. Now, timely management of student progression has been an important issue that we've had to grapple. When I took over as dean, I inherited a system that was designed for maybe 100 or 200 graduate students only in the Mumbai campus. That's when it was set up, and a tiny little staff in our graduate studies office managed everything manually. Registration forms, signatures, thesis copies, physical mailing, and so on. And worst of all, we did not have an electronic platform to manage student progression or database. We literally slung around Excel files from one center. How many students did you have in XYZ year, and so on. The first thing we did, and in fact, this was done during the pandemic by our information systems development group, headed by an amazing person, Nihita Goyal. We structured a platform so that we could enroll students electronically onto the platform, and then all of their approvals and everything are 100% electronic, their thesis submissions, all of their data. So for the first time, we began to have a view of how students are progressing through the system. Our funding body, the Department of Atomic Energy, restricts funding to 5 years for a PhD student and 6 years for an integrated master's and PhD student. And in India, this is inadequate because of the level of preparedness students come in with. They have rarely had proper lab experience. So a lot of time goes in training the students. So timely progression and timely completion of the PhD was something that I made the sort of focus of my deanship, because I thought if somebody in my position doesn't look out for students, then who will? Now, how does this connect with preprints? Because our institute is multidisciplinary, I have some information about other disciplines. Mathematics has always, to my knowledge, been in preprint mode. I think maybe it's a smaller community. Certainly that also applies for theoretical physics. A smaller community where everybody knows who did the work, and people wake up in the morning and look at the preprint server. I mean, this has been going on for decades. And that's all they care about. And they may not even bother to actually publish the work or send the work to a journal. So this is sort of the complete far, the leading edge of, I guess, where we all want to go. In terms of thesis requirements, my institute manages the academic procedures via 6 subject boards, each mapping to the subjects I mentioned. Mathematics, long ago, simply said, so each of these subject boards have publication requirements. Most of them broadly require a paper to be accepted before you can submit your thesis. It doesn't have to be the meat of your thesis that's accepted. It can be a smaller paper, but that is part of your thesis. Mathematics broke this a long time ago. They simply said, look, in our field, papers take up to a year or two to get reviewed. So we're going to accept preprints. And this was the way it was for a long, long time. Until recently, and here is why I guess I was invited to join this forum. Until recently, the subject board of biology proposed the same, that a thesis could be submitted with a first author bioarchive manuscript and not wait for the paper to get accepted. This met with some resistance, but we have successfully pulled it off, and this has shaved up to a year of a student's timeline. In good part because where the paper gets submitted is a complex decision between the advisor and the student, between a student who might want to leave early versus an advisor who might want to aim, quote unquote, higher, whatever that means. And just putting the study on bioarchive sort of takes out all those decisions and allows a student to at least submit the thesis. And then potentially continue on the advisor's grant as a postdoc after their thesis defense to actually wrap up the paper if they so wish. This has been in operation, but it's not as simple as it seems, because what we have found, perhaps understandably, is that advisors are very reluctant to put out something on bioarchive that they are not 100% ready to submit. Because after all, it's work from their lab that's out there in the public. So bioarchive has this sort of recognition. And this helps because finally the student actually gets to complete a piece of work and put it out there. It cuts into the timeline somewhat, but this is how it's been operational. The worst fears of the naysayers that, oh, people can put any shoddy random thing out on bioarchive and then the person will get a thesis. How can that be? Nobody's done that. People are very careful with what goes out in their name. So that's where we are at. We are still dealing with the idea that that preprints or bioarchive is not the end of the road. We still have journals, some extremely exorbitant APCs. In India, we typically go to hybrid journals. This whole idea of open access also means costs that would otherwise be, go into paying our labs research. And so I'm at a very privileged institute where our funding has been good and my grants have always been good. But I can't say that is a general statement for the country. And many of my colleagues, in fact, say that they upload on bioarchive to basically get around a paywalled journal, that they would upload as complete a version of the paper as they can, perhaps after a round of review or so that it's available to everybody, and then they're going through the review process. Open access journals are a privilege for rich labs because the costs are incredibly high. So the publishing industry is decreasing the number of hybrid journals, and that hurts labs in India. But I guess that's sort of the antithesis of the open science and archive publications. I mean, we want a situation where people don't necessarily even worry about publishing in a journal. I don't know when that future will come, but these are the steps we've taken.
Could you talk a little bit about the challenges of getting that new policy adopted institutional-wide? You talked a little bit about advisors being reluctant to put preprints up before they're necessarily ready to submit, but were there any other challenges of making that like a formal policy?
It had to be a formal policy. The subject board of biology, led by the convener, Professor Sandhya Kaushika, discussed it, proposed it to the academic council, and basically won the day. It may have helped that they had a biology background dean. I'm the first biology background dean of graduate studies, so I understood the system. And it was agreed to because math had already done it. So
Okay.
yeah.
Thanks so much, both of you. I really enjoyed the talks. I actually had a question sort of for both of you. I think you're coming at the this transition or change from slightly different positions. So from the faculty or from the administration, it's sort of interesting to contrast them. I was wondering if there are particular strategies that you used, both of you, when trying to get these changes enacted that you feel like are more likely to make such a change successful elsewhere. So like basically what did you do to sort of grease the wheels or make it easier for others to accept the change? Like what advice would you give to others in a similar position about the kinds of things that you did that made it easier for the changes to happen?
Data. I showed a table of student timelines of how it is taking longer for students to submit their thesis, time between first submission and review and final acceptance, and the fact that increasingly the world over, so here's how it helps when there are multiple biologists at the table. The academic council is a little bit overly represented by physicists because in our community, we simply have many, many more physics faculty. So it required persuading them that in biology, so I've sat on Human Frontiers postdoc grant committees. I've sat on other international evaluation committees, and I was able to say, with some emphasis that all of these recognize archive publications, with the idea being that, we evaluators are supposed to be experts in our field, so we should be able to look at the science and judge it without looking at the name of the journal it was published in. So data and arguments of this kind from experienced biologists made the case.
Yeah, I can second that. I mean, my approach was very data oriented as well. So part of this is, in psychology, and again, this isn't specific to psychology, unfortunately, but Katie, as you know, in psychology, our field has undergone a fairly public reckoning with the lack of reproducibility. Again, not psychology specific, unfortunately. But part of it was sort of, I was surprised not everybody had been following these issues, but part of it was bringing those data to fore, so people could see, look, we have a problem, and quite frankly, we need to do something about it. We're one department, but I don't want to be a department known as publishing unreplicable studies. The other part where, I pushed out a lot of information, so a lot of it was educating the faculty on uh, what are good practices for evaluation and what we shouldn't be doing. And so we leaned into the DORA statement, which really sort of discourages people from looking at journal names and impact factors and those sorts of things. I brought out a lot of data on the misuse and negative impact of things like citation counting and how that is not good. And so showing what's good, but also what's not, things that we shouldn't be doing, and really making those based in data and evidence as much as possible. And that, I think researchers respond to data. And so we should be making data-based arguments where possible, right? And in other cases, they were more things like, look, these are things we're going to have to reckon with at some point in the near future. Here in the US, the government rolled out a requirement for making our work openly available. Some people were already doing it. And so this was a matter of fairness and workload, right? So how can we make sure the people who are doing this extra work are getting rewarded for doing that work? So it's not, it does take time and effort to get your data in a format that can be reusable. It takes time and effort to then go through the extra step of putting something up on bioRxiv or whatever. And so we want to make sure that people are being rewarded for those pro-social behaviors.
There's a question in the chat from Monica. How critical do you think it is for students or trainees to see the publishing process in full so that they can learn how to navigate it prior to graduation? I just particularly put emphasis here on postdocs actually, because often I know a lot of postdocs who don't see the whole process.
Yeah. Could I address that?
Yeah.
That's a great question. It's absolutely necessary. It's vital. In fact, I mean, when we start out in research, we're babies, right? We don't have a clue. Uh, and the first time a paper goes out and then it gets bashed up and it comes back, you have to go through that milestone in life, hopefully with a supportive advisor. My strategy for this is it shouldn't all wait until the student is ready to graduate. So I, in fact, put students as, in the second seat or third seat to deal with reviewers' comments of papers of other students who have finished their PhDs and left. So in India, our labs tend to be student heavy. They are the primary workforce. I've been fortunate to have an occasional postdoc or two in the lab, but it tends to be, 5 to 8 students and maybe 2 postdocs if you're lucky. So currently, I'm juggling more than 3 manuscripts and reviewer rebuttals, and I have 3 students who are pretty new, who without fully appreciating what they're in for, have done the "I will take the ring," and but it's a great way to start off, because they don't have to do the whole project and conceive the whole structure of the experiment. They have to do 1 or 2 or 3 experiments that are required to address the reviewer's comments. It's a circumscribed goal. They have to learn 1 or 2, and they contribute to a paper, and then they learn how to make the figures. They learn how to write legends, and they learn to do the whole thing. They learn to actually. So our submission is always a ritual. The youngest person on the team always gets to hit the submit button, and everybody's excited. And then 2 hours later, it comes back because of some formatting or something or something. So it's always a little party each time we do the submit. And yeah, so they can learn this early in their first, second, third years. They don't have to wait till the 5th year. And then if they finish their thesis and they do not choose to, so it should, at that point, the power differential really has to break down. If they can submit their thesis, then it should be their choice whether they stay and continue and wrap up the paper until publication, or they leave. It should really be their choice. And we as advisors can put somebody in the second seat from an early stage, or after they've left, somebody comes and learns stuff. We should manage projects better to not hold back the student for the paper. It should be their choice. Some do. Some want to stay and milk the next paper after that, and that empowers them.
One thing, if I can just add to that, so agree early as possible. And one thing that I've been doing in an undergraduate class is sort of opening up that process in full. So we watch a movie called Paywall the Movie, which really talks about the publishing industry. And I think when you see what the publishing industry looks like as a very, very young pre-graduate school student, I mean, your eyes open up like, oh my God, this is what I'm getting myself into. But it does then mean that they then, right, one of my lessons that I give them is that you are the future of science. And so if you don't like what you see with the way the publishing industry is working and the priorities that you have as an individual versus the priorities of, say, the incentive systems, having that sort of knowledge going into the game, right, before graduate school, I think just fundamentally changes the way people can approach it. Like, knowledge is power, right? If you don't know what the system's like, it's really hard to overcome that.
Yeah, that's a really good question, because we've got some people in our community who run graduate level courses where they teach peer review by reviewing preprints. So the course builds up how to do review, and it's assessed by posting publicly reviews of preprints. And I would love to see more undergraduate and grad level courses that not only cover that kind of stuff, but also the history of publishing and peer review, and actually teach people where it all comes from and why we do things in this rather bizarre way that we do. Sandra.
Thank you. So I'm sorry to bring this a little bit towards the negative, not negative, but I just want to share some of the things that I hear, or that I hear when we bring preprints, and the good things about preprints to professors, for example, right? So already PIs. And what they say is that, yeah, this is really nice, but at the end of the day, here in Spain, for example, what you will be evaluated for when you apply for grants is, citations and where did you publish. So I always encounter this kind of wall. And even if you bring data about, the publishing system is rigged and it's not working, they say, yeah, okay, but at the end of the day, what I need is money, and this money will be given. I will be evaluated by this. So here is like, I guess, one step further, or one level higher, which is the like the grants. How are they given? So I don't know. I just wanted to ask you, like, what would be your advice to answer to those kind of comments?
Well,
Well, go ahead, Shubha. That's fine. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you for asking this extremely tough question. Okay, I'm going to say it as I see it. I spent 11 years in the US, PhD and postdoc, and then I took a job in India. When I would go to the Society for Neuroscience meetings, which I have attended my whole career there, people would see me with a badge from India, and pretty much I could see in their faces they'd written me off the sort of the cool kids playing field. I returned to India to contribute to India, but I knew that I had to make an impact. I wanted to put Indian neuroscience on the world map, which meant I had to play the game by the rules that existed at the time and still exist. I attended publishing strategy workshops, one amazing one from the then editor of Nature Neuroscience, Sandra Amott, Effective Strategies of Successful Authors. I followed everything she said, and I did have a cool story, my student Ryan Remedios, and it got published in Nature Neuroscience. So my point is, I did have a nose. I developed a nose for putting my energies into some cool studies and some safety studies, and I protected the cool ones as best as I could so that they would publish well. Because if I didn't do so, nobody was going to invite me to fora like this or other fora to talk about, whatever, advice and so on. You have to establish yourself by the criteria at the time, and then you can work to change them. Now, I would say it's a very easy cop-out to say, okay, fine, it's the criteria at the time, and most people don't work to change them. I like to think that I did. And just play the game by the rules. I did work to change them, and I am doing so. So, I mean, you can't change all of Spain, right? What we're talking about are beginning efforts. And when it is in your power to make a change, don't hold back. Right, so the steering committee of the Human Frontiers, the HS Frontier Science Program, they made the change. They actually instruct their committee members, do not look at journal names and accept a preprint as good as it. We get this instruction. So when you're in a position to make these decisions, if you do, that's how change will happen. But you have to develop the platform from which people will hear your voice. And for that, you do what you have to do.
Anything to add, Michael?
Yeah, well, yeah, my system processing here goes slow sometimes. It is a tough question, and it's a tough position to be in. And so we're both administrators at different levels. I'm a department head, and it was like when I became department head, I decided this was something that I was going to invest my time and effort in. And this was something I was going to make profound changes in. And you're right, there were faculty who were somewhat skeptical, like, oh, well, can we do it? Are we able to do it? Well, what about our students? And I said, look, do you want to do what's right? Or do you want to do what's best for you and you alone? And when I didn't exactly frame it that way, but it was kind of like that. I think when it's framed as, we got to do the right thing, right? And people want to do the right thing. And if all we're doing is doing whatever we need to advance our own careers, what the hell are we doing? I mean, the fast scientist who makes a lot of errors for the purposes of publishing is not doing science. And so what we need to do to foster high quality science is slow down a little bit. We should be doing it. And this is sort of a personal responsibility thing, in my view. Like we all have a personal responsibility. The challenge does come when we have a community that we have to first say, look, as a community, we need to do this, right? And that's going to go faster or slower in different places. I have a colleague I work very closely with, Erin McKiernan, who does a lot of work in this space. She's in Mexico, and at her institution, she's like, look, I give talks at this all over the world, but in my own department, we are so far away from making changes that it's almost ridiculous. I mean, I'm putting words in her mouth, but this is the way she feels, right? And it's because of this attitude of, I did it this way, so therefore people who come after me have to do it this way. And I think breaking that is really, really critical. It does take people to do it, right? It's not going to happen if there aren't people who are going to step up and say, I need to be the one who's going to usher in change. And then it's a matter of convincing your colleagues. And for you, it's getting the next leadership in your department to be the one who's going to do that, right? Or maybe you're going to be the next leader who's going to do it. Even better. I'll stop.
Could I add to that? Because I liked what you said about community. And I have a concrete suggestion that all of us can actually do. And again, it's from my own personal experience. I moved to India in 1999. The first time I was invited to give a talk in an international conference was 2008, only after I had published in Science. Okay, so what I'm saying is, how many of us, when we sit on conference committees, you don't have to be very senior to do that. You get onto conference organizing committees, even as a junior faculty. How many of us actively look on bioRxiv and invite people from, say, the global south or places that are not represented? How many of us instead, I mean, we're all human, right? We look at, oh, wow, cool study published in, XYZ flashy journal. We do that when we invite people, right? I mean, at a first pass, we invite people we know. Then if we decide to go to people we don't know, we use the journal brand name. And so as a community, these are the first steps we can take.
Yeah.
And for that, you don't have to be department chair or dean or anything.
Yeah, I always encourage that when I was in academia. I always encouraged seminar speakers to be non-big names. I tried to get it to be early career researchers and postdocs, but that was too far for everyone. But preprints was kind of accepted. That was a really good question. I just want to add to that. The way change works in reality, sadly, is it's incremental. You can't. If anyone saw a recent interaction between me and Mike Eiston on Blue Sky not that long ago, I was trying to make this point. You have to work with the system that exists, which is the most frustrating thing in the world. I wish we could just burn it down, which is what Mike's response to me was. But we can't do that. And so you can play the game whilst also doing all these really good practices in place. Put a preprint out and still submit to Nature. It's all right. You're benefiting from it. You're still doing positive practices. But when you're teaching trainees, celebrate the preprint more. That's what I did in everything I've published. It's always been the preprint that's been
Actually, I mean, that's
celebration.
great, right? Because bioRxiv didn't exist until some time
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
So for the first decade of my lab's history, there was no bioRxiv.
Yeah.
I think Ludo has a question.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Yeah, I first want to say that I'm really impressed by what both of you are doing and what you have managed to accomplish. It's admirable. So yeah, really great to see this. At my university in the Netherlands, in the city of Leiden, trying to do similar things with mixed success. So I find it really interesting also to hear from you the kind of the way in which you managed to get support for some of your ideas. I have a question for you, Michael. So it seems you have been quite effective within your own institution in pushing for change, which is great. But you started your talk by actually showing the bigger picture of Helios, and then of course we have basically the US system at large. So, what is your vision on how the things you have managed to do at your own institution, how they could be, probably, I guess, through the Helios collaboration, how they could be scaled up?
Yeah, really good question. So the scaling is a challenge because once you start talking to another institution, the question is who in that institution is responsible and how can you get the seeds of change planted? So within Helios, there have been, I can't really go into too many details, unfortunately, just because, authorized. I'm filling in for Caitlin Carter in this respect, who is a strategic lead for Helios. But there have been a couple of high-level presidents and provost meetings where there have been explicit discussions of, okay, what are the next steps for ushering in change across a set of institutions, right? So, but this is institutional. So here, right, you might want to look for things like changes in university level policies that make open scholarship rewarding and require it to be implemented in tenure and promotion criteria. There have been a couple of institutions who have taken that first step. University of Vermont has, and I think Lehigh University has also launched an initiative. And so those will be trickling down into the individual units. For my own part, what I've been trying to do is work across psychology. So I'm a department chair, and in psychology in the US, we have an organization called the Council of Graduate Doctoral Programs in Psychology. We meet once a year. And actually, in a week from now, I have an information session I'm doing for about 20 other department chairs to try to sort of move other university, other departments of psychology down the pathway for better sharing of our scholarship. And so the question of community really is, okay, what is the right level? What community should we be focusing on? And there's this issue, right? If you're in psychology, we look at other departments of psychology and say, okay, what are they doing? We don't necessarily look at what sociology here at Maryland is doing, right? We kind of look laterally within our own discipline. And so what I've been trying to do is to sort of really reach out to the other department chairs and leaderships of other departments of psychology to bring other people into the fold. And that's my sense that once we get a critical mass of people who are making these changes, other people are going to end up making the changes too. And that's kind of the attitude of Helios. They are really looking for a couple of good case studies where positive change has happened that can then hopefully serve as attractants for other universities. And I'll say that Leiden's been leading the charge in a lot of this stuff. So your university, I think, at least it's my impression, there's been a lot of positive change that's happening in the Netherlands, at Leiden in particular.
Interesting, Michael. Thank you for this response. Very helpful. It's interesting that last remark that you made. In some sense, I agree, and we're working hard on all of these things. At the same time, of course, from the inside, you also see all the things that don't go well, and there's a lot that is still not going well. But this is really helpful, and thanks a lot.
I just had an idea for a research project. Thank you. Okay, so we're at time, so I'll close the session there. Thank you to Michael and Shubha for a really informative session. And thank you to everyone for really good questions. I think it's always nice when you stump someone with a question and they have to think about it. I just want to come back to that last point as a thing to end on. Even small, tiny little steps really matter. So it doesn't matter what career stage you are, it doesn't matter how much of a voice you feel you do or do not have. You can do little things that push things forward. And if we all push things forward a little bit, things move in the direction we want them to. So every little bit helps.